But here's the thing. Are those opposed to a vaccine actually stopping lockdown from ending? The very people, you could say, who are more, if you like, forthright on their objection to the lockdown could be the very people that stop it from ending. 0344 499 1000. I mentioned that at the beginning. Incredible stats. Something happened, though, in this country around about Christmas, right, with the virus. I think we can all probably share this. I lost count last year of how many phone-ins we did when people would say, relatively few people, anecdotally, seem to know many people who'd had the virus. Remember this, on the grander scale. Lots of people say, I simply don't know anybody. And it was kind of pretty standard to have that conversation. Do you know what? This has been going 6 months. I still don't know anybody who's had it. And that suddenly changed. Within about a fortnight, it seemed that every other person you knew had it, or someone in their family had it. My mate down the road had it. A kid that went to school with my little boy had it. The parents of my neighbour had it. My own father-in-law, mother-in-law, sister-in-law, brother-in-law and niece all had it out of nowhere. This thing was going through the population like wildfire, and of course we've seen that reflected in those daily infection figures. I know that's not the whole story, by the way. I'm merely making the point that we've seen a big change in the last couple of months in terms of those who have COVID. And of course, the vaccine is seen as, for the best part, the best answer we have to this. And I mentioned in the intro there that we've now vaccinated more people with the first jab in this country than the rest of the EU put together. That is just incredible. Brussels has been forced to admit that they were very slow. There was an apology from Ursula von der Leyen, the EU chief, who insisted allowing members... This is incredible. If you ever wondered about Brexit, listen to this. She insisted allowing member states to buy jabs separately would have ended our community. Right there is the problem, the biggest problem with the EU. It would have ended our community. And if that is how you define the EU, fatal error, I would argue. It's a trading bloc. The minute you start romanticising it into things like that, well, we're all, EU brothers and sisters, even if that means missing out on life-saving jabs. Wow. More than 90% of the over 70s in this country have had the vaccine, but yesterday Boris Johnson put out a plea to the missing 2 million. I should say, by the way, the missing 2 million isn't all over 70s. There are care workers, I think, in that group as well. But around about 2 million people entitled to the vaccine who've not yet had the vaccine. 0344 499 1000. Now, I found myself in a curious position this morning, but it goes back to a phone-in we did a couple of weeks back when I used that, what for many people was a very offensive term, anti-vaxxers. And what I did when we had this phone-in, I was brown bread as far as quite a lot of people were concerned, not people that I necessarily want listening to our show or our station for that matter, but there was a confusion over the term anti-vaxxer, which I didn't think needed explaining. So I wasn't talking about somebody who doesn't want to have the vaccine or who won't have the vaccine. That would be me. I'm not fussed about having the vaccine. I've never had a flu vaccine. I say this every time we talk about it. I rarely take paracetamol. I tend not to medicate very much. I'm all right with that, okay? It's not compulsory, so am I going to have the vaccine? Well, probably not. That was my stance on this. Probably not. So when I use the term anti-vaccine, I wasn't talking about people who just don't want to have the vaccine. I was talking about people who make stuff up about the vaccine. I was talking about people who invent lies and conspiracies about the vaccine. That's the group I was talking about. This group's existed in different forms for hundreds of years in this country. It's not new, the anti-vaccine thing. We talked the other day about how in Leicester there was 80,000 people in Leicester turned up to an anti-vaccination protest in 1870. No social media to get that one together. 80,000 people mobilised in Leicester. The Leicester Anti-Vaccination Group organised this, and 80,000 people pitched up because they didn't want people having vaccines for smallpox. The vaccine, of course, turned out to save hundreds of thousands of lives, as most vaccines do. 0344 499 1000. So I wasn't talking about somebody who just utilises their basic choice, their freedom of choice, to not have it. That's fine. Or so I thought. I'll come back to that. So I was talking about the tinfoil hatters, okay, the 5G Bill Gateses, that lot. that lot who think there's some kind of conspiracy if you advertise a book written by Gates, let alone start talking about 5G and everything else that goes with it. This curious group of people don't seem to have the same view on any other form of tablet or medication, but when it comes to a vaccine, my goodness, terrible things are going to happen. You'll grow a tail before the year's out. So that was I didn't think it needed explaining. It probably did, because some people conflated that view, the term anti-vaxxer, with those that just decided they don't want it. So my position has been, and I don't feel massively passionate on this, but it's been, I probably won't have it because I've never had one or needed one, and if I'm not in an age group yet that's required to have it. I'm relatively speaking, I'm not an old git yet. Stop it, Ricky. I'm also, quite fit. I'm not obese. I'm not diabetic. I've got none of that stuff going on, so I probably won't have it. That was my thinking. But then I thought, it's not actually about me, is it? It's not about me not having it, because we've now got talk about vaccination passports. This isn't new. None of this stuff is new. Of course, there's previously been people who would have temporary stamps in passports in the past because of things like smallpox and other issues, other fevers that have been out there. And while they're getting this thing sorted, travel is curtailed unless you've had the vaccine. So even that isn't that new. But of course, it isn't about me. I can say all I like. I'm not bothered. I'm not going to have the vaccine. And if I get it, in all probability, I might end up on that roulette wheel of being the unlucky one that ends up being ventilated. The one in a gazillion chance of my age group that cops a bad dose of this thing. But statistically, I'm unlikely to even know I've got it. And if I did know I got it, then not much is really going to happen, statistically speaking. That doesn't undermine the seriousness for other people. But that's the group I'm in, that statistically I would. But of course, it's not about me. Because I could have it, not know I've had it, or not know I've got it, and I could be spreading it to someone else. So it's no good. The freedom of choice, it's my body, therefore I decide, actually doesn't work if we want to achieve something that looks like herd immunity, if we want to achieve an end to the lockdown. People like me banging on about the fact that I'm not going to have the vaccine, frankly, is the very thing that will keep us in lockdown, right? So the people most passionately angered by lockdown, and you see a lot of this, are the very, who are usually the people that won't have the vaccine either, perhaps for different reasons. So the very people that are angry about the lockdown are the very people that's going to stop the lockdown ending. Isn't that a supreme irony? 0344 499 1000. It's not about the fact that you feel you can make a decision over your own body. It's not about the fact that I feel I can make a decision whether or not I get the jab or not. If I get it, I can spread it. If you get it, you can spread it. And within a week or two of you having it, not realizing it, being out and about, trains, transmission, workplace, wherever, supermarkets, hundreds, as a direct result of you having it, could, of course, contract the virus. Now, of course, the vaccine doesn't completely stop it, but we know that the viral load is reduced. I think in the Oxford vaccine, we know it's reduced. So therefore, you've got a less potent version of the virus. Therefore, the potential spread is, it follows scientifically, going to be potentially less severe. So by all of us having the vaccine, we come out of lockdown quicker, right? That's where we're at. I'm sure that's where we're at. The very people who are incandescent about the lockdown, absolutely raging about the lockdown. Some of those people don't even like the masks or the 2-meter thing. That group are the people that are going to keep us in perpetual lockdown. Isn't that strange? 0344 499 1000. Are the people opposed to the vaccine stopping this lockdown from ending? The Prime Minister said that he will announce a roadmap out of lockdown on February 22nd, but after last night's warning, are the people who are opposed to the vaccine stopping lockdown from ending? Let's speak to Professor Azeem Majeed, who's head of the Department of Primary Care Public Health at Imperial College London. Professor, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us.
Good afternoon, Ian. Nice to speak to you.
And likewise, I asked the question in a fairly crude way. Are the people opposed to the vaccine stopping the lockdown from ending? But the more I think about this, I think there's something in that.
Yeah, to some extent, that is correct, Ian. So to obtain a high level of coverage and therefore lead to herd immunity, we do need people to get vaccinated. So we find large groups of people aren't being vaccinated. That means we'll keep on getting outbreaks, particularly during the autumn and winter, when the infection will come back again after the spring. So essentially, we get high coverage in all groups, not just those at risk, such as the older people, the healthcare workers, but also young people as well when their turn comes as well. So we need high coverage in all population groups so that we really suppress the infection and can finally come out of lockdown and live more normal lives again.
Are you impressed, even from a clinical perspective? This is your world. You know, you deal with this kind of stuff all the time. But I would imagine you must be impressed by the vaccination program so far in the UK.
Yeah, it's gone very, very well. So as you mentioned, we're ahead of Europe in vaccination. We've now vaccinated more than 1 in 5 people in the UK. Over 30 million people have had 1 dose, which is excellent progress. So we need to make sure we keep that progress up over the next few months, and by the end of the summer, make sure we offer the vaccine to all adults, and then eventually to children as well, once it's licensed for them. So as I mentioned, to really come out of this pandemic once you really get a high coverage.
So what do you say then to somebody like myself, who I've never had a flu jab, but just not had one, and there's no politics behind that, there's no fear as such behind that, there's certainly no conspiracy. I've just never had one. I'm always a bit hesitant about taking a paracetamol, for goodness sake. You know, I tend not to medicate that much at all. What would you say to someone like me in terms of the importance then of having a vaccine?
I think it's 2 things I'd say. Firstly, you are protecting yourself. So death is not the only bad outcome from COVID-19. People get infected, they can get a very prolonged illness, a very unpleasant illness. Sometimes they're left with long-term complications, such as heart and lung damage. So it's not just about people who die. It's also about people who have these long-term complications following a COVID infection. Secondly, also, you mentioned the Oxford vaccine study, which showed it did suppress infection rates and reduce risk of people being virus carriers. So as well as protecting yourself by being vaccinated, you then cut the risk to others as well, in particular people at high risk, such as your elderly relatives, your maybe your older work colleagues and so on, who are at much higher risk of death.
And I think that's the game changer really for me. I'd not really thought about that aspect, not out of selfishness or anything. I just literally had not considered. It's all very well utilising my own right to autonomy over my body, etc. However, you know, this is a collective thing, and you know there could be real dangers in walking around, even if you're tickety-boo yourself and nothing's wrong. And you know, there are people who get COVID and don't even realise it, but while they've got it, they're carrying it, and while they're carrying it, they could spread it.
That's right. And so if you're, say, 20 years old, it's quite likely you have a very mild COVID infection. But while you're infected, you will be carrying the virus and could infect your parents, your grandparents, your work colleagues, your tutors in university. So it's about other people and not just about yourself as well, Ian. So that's an excellent reminder.
And interesting, the news about, you know, certain vaccines reducing viral load, etc. I mean, are vaccines being tweaked all the time so that when we hear good news, I mean, for example, the Oxford AstraZeneca one, where we found out quite recently about its reduction in viral load, we didn't know that at the beginning. We found that out. Does that mean that those responsible for that vaccine keep going back to it and finding new ways to improve it?
The vaccines do have to be modified, but that process takes time, maybe 6 to 12 months. So it's quite likely we will modify vaccines to deal with new strains of coronavirus, but those vaccines won't be available probably for 6 or 12 months. They have to be developed, then tested, and then rolled out, and that process can take at least 6 months and perhaps even slightly longer. So for now, we'll have the vaccines we've got. But towards the end of the year, we may get new vaccines which are modified to deal with the new variants that are circulating at the time.
And is there a kind of word on the clinical street, as it were, in terms of, you know, how many of us need the vaccine in order for life to continue? I appreciate this isn't your professional role to ascertain these things, but is there a kind of a loose area, a statistic out there that says if this percentage are vaccinated, then usually
probably at least 80% of people probably, and if the new variants are more infectious, perhaps even higher than that, perhaps 90% of people need to be vaccinated. So we do need a very high coverage of vaccines to really suppress the infection. So if probably half people get immunised, then we're going to keep on getting large outbreaks across the country, which isn't very good for us or society in general.
Indeed. Professor, thank you. Professor Azeem Majeed with us here on Talk Radio. He's Professor of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial College. You heard what he said. 80%, I guess the more percent you get. I mean, at the moment, we're going unbelievably in terms of vaccination in that first dose. I don't know how many people have had the second, what the stats are on that. Maybe we could get some info throughout the course of the show. But I'm fessing up here really, because I'd gone from that position of thinking, well, this isn't statistically not going to affect me, although I have made the point myself, as the professor just said. Dying isn't the only, it's not living or dying. You know, you might be one of those people who gets a drop of it. You know, a mate of mine round about the same age down the road from me, I mean, he was laid up for a good couple of weeks and said it was the most unpleasant thing he'd ever been through. You'd kind of rather not go through that, or if you're going to go through it, you'd rather you had the least worst case of it, right? If a vaccine is going to reduce the viral load, therefore your symptoms are not as great, your illness isn't as bad, and the chances of you spreading the virus, if you do, would be lessened, and even if you did, you'd be spreading a less virulent form of the virus. I think that's the theory. Which brings us back to the question, are the people opposed to having a vaccine the very people stopping the lockdown from ending? Because when I put these questions out onto social media, it's chock full of people who say, I'm not having the vaccine. There's no way I'm having the vaccine. You know, we need this country unlocked as soon as we can. And there's a correlation between people who are passionate about what they see as the ridiculousness or even the futility, economically, medically or otherwise, of the lockdown, and those that don't want the vaccine. And yet the very people who are most passionate are caught, if we're following the science and this story correctly, the very people most passionate about and angry about the lockdown are the very people that are going to keep the lockdown going because you don't want to have the vaccine. Because I can see a government minister standing there. It's going to be Hancock or Johnson who's going to say, we're nearly there on the lockdown. We're on easing the lockdown. So we've now got 50% of the country who've been vaccinated. But until we get 68% or 70%, we're not going to ease the lockdown. We'll have a version of easing of it, but it won't be anything like you want until we have more people vaccinated. I know that plays in to the kind of conspiracy card for many people. Don't believe all that bananas. It's nonsense, okay? Just think about the fact that those that are opposed to the vaccine, or just don't want, I don't mean opposed because you think you're going to grow another head if you have it, or you think it's all part of some greater plan to reduce population, or all of this mumbo. It's not that. You just don't want it. You may be, without realising it, contributing to the lockdown extending.